I was told to stay quiet since I was new, but then my manager started presenting my ideas, so I posted time-stamped proof in a private client forum, and when they asked why I wasn't listed as lead, the room went dead silent. Then everything changed. The silence after that client meeting still rings in my ears. You could feel it, that sudden, sharp tension that happens when someone realizes they've been caught red-handed. My manager, Daniel, froze mid-sentence as the senior client director scrolled through the screenshots I'd posted. My original drafts, my voice memos, my notes with timestamps. Every single idea he'd presented as his own had my handwriting all over it. The client's eyes flicked between Daniel and me. "So," she asked, her voice steady but razor-sharp, "why exactly wasn't she listed as the lead on these proposals?" That's when the room went quiet. You know that kind of silence that feels like a scream? That was it. Everyone looking at Daniel, waiting for him to explain. His mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. I sat there, calm on the outside, shaking on the inside. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might punch through my chest. I'd spent nights wondering if I was overreacting, if maybe it was all just how the company worked. But now, seeing his face drain of color, I knew I hadn't been crazy. I'd been used. Rewind 3 months, though, and I was just grateful to be there. Fresh job at a major consulting firm in Chicago. I'd finally landed a spot after years of scraping by at smaller agencies. Everyone said this was where real careers were made. But from my first week, something felt off. Daniel was the kind of manager who smiled too wide when he was taking credit and frowned just enough to make you doubt yourself when things went wrong. I wanted to impress him, to prove I belonged, so I kept my head down. That first big project, the retail analytics pitch, I spent nights building the entire framework. I even practiced how he should present it, thinking we were a team. Then the meeting happened. He presented my strategy word for word, didn't mention me once. Everyone clapped. He got praised for his innovative thinking. And I sat there, smiling like a fool, clapping for him too. It happened again on the next project. And the next. Every time I tried to speak up in meetings, he'd pull me aside afterward with that condescending tone. "Hey," he'd say, smiling, "you're still new here. You don't understand the culture yet. You'll get your time. For now, just support, okay? Support." That word started to sound like stay invisible. I started saving everything: drafts, notes, voice memos, screenshots. Not because I planned revenge at first, but because I needed proof I wasn't crazy. Still, the more I collected, the more I saw the pattern, and the deeper I realized how many people were probably helping him keep it going. But the moment that truly broke me came one Friday afternoon. I saw Daniel and another manager, Kelly, rehearsing for the biggest client presentation of the quarter. And there it was, my campaign plan. My phrasing, my graphs, my tagline, everything. And when I confronted him about it in his office, he just laughed, actually laughed. "You're just here to support," he said, smiling like it was nothing. "Don't make this a thing. It's bad for your reputation." That night, I stopped being scared. And 3 weeks later, I made sure everyone in that client's leadership team saw exactly who'd done the real work. Now, in that conference room, with everyone staring at him, I finally saw the fear on his face. But that was before the part that no one saw coming, when HR got involved, and suddenly, it wasn't just Daniel who was scrambling. Because apparently, he wasn't acting alone. I joined the firm in late February, still half shocked that I'd even been hired. It was one of those sleek Chicago consulting offices with glass walls, exposed brick, and the kind of quiet hum that makes you afraid to breathe too loudly. Everyone looked polished, confident, a little too perfect. I'd worked my way up from nowhere, small-town Illinois, community college, then years freelancing to survive. I wasn't born into this corporate world. I clawed my way into it. So yeah, when they offered me the position, I felt proud. Terrified, but proud. Daniel was assigned as my manager on day one. Early 40s, clean-cut, always smiling in that corporate way that makes you wonder if there's anything real behind it. He told me right away that he valued fresh talent and wanted to mentor me into leadership. I believed him. I was naive enough to think mentors actually existed. For the first month, everything seemed fine. I worked hard, harder than I ever had. I came early, stayed late, took notes on everything. Daniel gave me small tasks at first: research, summaries, client briefs. I poured myself into them. Then came the retail rebound project, a pitch for a national clothing chain trying to modernize their brand. Daniel pulled me in, saying it was my chance to shine behind the scenes. I built everything. Data analysis, creative direction, even wrote the presentation deck. 2 days before the meeting, Daniel called me into a small glass conference room. He was holding my printed report, smiling that fake calm smile. "This is really good work," he said, "but I think it'll land better if it comes from me. You know how these clients are seniority sells." I didn't know what to say, I just nodded. I told myself it didn't matter who presented it, as long as the client liked it. But sitting in that meeting and watching him take full credit, hearing him literally repeat my phrasing like he'd written it, something inside me cracked. And when the client said, "Daniel, your insights are brilliant," and he just said thank you, without even glancing my way, I swallowed my pride and clapped along. Afterward, he came up to me, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "That's how we win as a team." A team. Right, then it kept happening. Each new project, same pattern. I'd create, he'd claim. I'd question, he'd warn. The first time I tried to speak up in a team meeting, suggesting an approach I'd been developing, Daniel smiled tightly and cut me off with, "Let's save that for internal discussion. You're still learning the ropes." After the meeting, he pulled me aside again, voice soft but sharp. "Don't jump in like that again," he said. "It makes people uncomfortable when new hires try to overstep." That word, overstep, stuck to my ribs. Like I'd done something wrong by speaking. By mid-April, I started documenting everything. Not out of paranoia, but out of self-preservation. I saved my drafts in a private cloud, time-stamped everything, even recorded short voice memos after meetings, summaries of what I'd contributed and what was said. Then I started noticing something worse. Kelly, another project manager, using my exact data models in her client presentations. When I asked her about it casually, she just smiled and said, "Oh, Daniel shared your framework. He said it was part of the team pool now." That's when I realized it wasn't just about Daniel being a credit thief. He was building his reputation off my back and looping others in to help keep me quiet. Still, I didn't act right away. I needed more than frustration. I needed proof, leverage, timing. And then came the Summit Apparel project, the one that would make or break the quarter. Daniel said he wanted me to shadow the process, learn how a senior pitch worked. What he didn't know was that I'd already set up my own way to track every edit, every file change, every piece of evidence that tied my work to his slides. It was supposed to be my shot to finally be recognized. But instead, it became the beginning of something else entirely. Because that project, the one I built from the ground up, was the same one that would later expose him in front of everyone. But before it got that far, something happened that changed everything, something that made it personal. By early May, I was running on caffeine, resentment, and pure survival instinct. Every time I opened my laptop, I felt that mix of anger and adrenaline that comes from knowing you're being used, but still showing up because you have rent to pay. The Summit Apparel pitch had become the company's crown jewel. It was a multi-million-dollar client deal, and Daniel was leading the charge. Which really meant I was building every detail behind the scenes while he smiled in meetings and called it our collaboration. I stayed late every night, polishing data, refining visuals, and writing the entire narrative of the campaign. I even recorded voice memos during my cab rides home, thoughts, updates, ideas I wanted to remember. I labeled them with the date and time. Those recordings would later become my smoking gun. Around that time, Daniel started acting more territorial. He'd hover by my desk, check my drafts before I was done, suggest changes that somehow erased my authorship. He'd CC senior managers on my updates, but rewrite my intros so they sounded like his own. Then came the kicker. One Monday morning, I came in early and saw him in the glass meeting room with Kelly. They were laughing, rehearsing something. I heard my own words, my exact tagline, come out of his mouth. He was literally practicing my pitch. I froze outside the door, watched him gesture to the slides I'd designed and saved on my drive, and say, "This will be the hook that seals it." I stood there until he saw me through the glass. His smile faltered, but he didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted his flow. Later that day, I confronted him in his office. "Why are you using my work without crediting me?" I asked. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. He leaned back in his chair, calm as ever. "We're a team," he said. "Everything you do is for the team. You're just here to support." Then, that smirk. "You should be grateful you're even in the room for this client. Don't let ambition make you sloppy." Sloppy. That word burned. That night I went home and pulled up everything I'd saved. Every file, every timestamp, every Slack message, every audio note. I compiled it all into one massive, organized folder. Labeled it Proof, Ownership Records. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. I just knew I needed to protect myself. Over the next few weeks, Daniel got bolder. He started scheduling client prep sessions without inviting me. I'd find out through the grapevine that my slides had been presented and praised while I sat in the dark. Then one afternoon, during a team lunch, a senior consultant named Maria pulled me aside. She'd been quiet around Daniel, but now she whispered, "I saw your slides in the client deck. You weren't credited. Are you aware?" I nodded. My voice came out flat. "Yeah, it's not the first time." She hesitated, then said something that made my stomach twist. "You're not the first person he's done this to either." I pressed her for more, but she clammed up fast. Said she didn't want to get dragged into another mess. Another mess. That night, I started digging. I looked up past team rosters, LinkedIn profiles, old project names. I found patterns, people who'd left suddenly after working under Daniel. People whose projects mysteriously got restructured. It wasn't just me. It was a system. And when I realized he'd been feeding client-facing decks with other people's work, while positioning himself for a director promotion, that's when my patience ended. I started planning. Quietly, carefully. And when the next all-hands client meeting rolled around, the one Daniel was bragging about to everyone, I decided that was the day I'd make sure the truth came out. But I had no idea the first twist was already in motion, and that Daniel wasn't just stealing credit. He was preparing to throw me under the bus. The betrayal hit me like a sucker punch. It happened 2 days before the big client meeting, the one that was supposed to secure the Summit apparel contract and Daniel's precious promotion. I was called into a quick sync with HR. I thought it was about logistics or workload balance. But when I walked in, Daniel was already sitting there, wearing that fake concerned expression, the one he used when pretending to care. The HR rep smiled tightly. "We've received some feedback about your collaboration style," she said, voice gentle in that dangerous way. "It seems there have been some issues with how credit and authorship have been handled within your team." My stomach dropped. "Issues?" I repeated. Daniel sighed, shaking his head just enough to seem pained. "Look, I've been trying to mentor you," he said, avoiding my eyes. "But lately, there's been some confusion about ownership of ideas. Clients have noticed some inconsistencies in our internal messaging." It took a second for it to click. He was flipping it on me. HR nodded along like she'd already decided what the story was. "Daniel mentioned that some of your materials might have overlapped with company work he'd already developed. Can you clarify how your process works?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm. "Every document I've made is time-stamped. I've kept detailed records of my contributions." That made Daniel's smile twitch. "I'm sure that's true," he said smoothly. "But the optics are tricky. We can't have mixed messaging with such a big client." Optics. That word made me want to throw something. When I left that meeting, I sat in the bathroom stall for 15 minutes, shaking. It was so calculated. He'd gone to HR first, painted me as a credit grabber, and now I was the problem. That night, I listened back to my own voice memos. The ones I'd made after each project meeting, where I summarized what I'd done, what was said, and who took what credit. I could literally hear my own voice saying, "Daniel just told me not to speak up again, said I'm here to support." That's when the fear turned into something else, focus. I realized that he wasn't just trying to silence me. He was prepping to replace me, because when the client pitch succeeded, he wanted no loose ends. No one who could say, "That was my work." And he almost pulled it off. The next morning, I was removed from the client meeting calendar. The invite disappeared. When I asked why, Daniel replied in a single-line email, "We need to streamline the presentation. You can provide support from backend as discussed." Backend. That's what I'd been reduced to. The invisible hands making his lies look good. But what he didn't know was that I'd already shared my timestamped drafts with Maria, the quiet senior consultant who'd warned me. She'd looked through everything, and when she saw the pattern, she didn't just believe me. She told me something that made my skin crawl. Apparently, Daniel had been doing this for years. He'd even convinced HR that junior analysts were too eager and unaware of professional boundaries. Whenever someone pushed back, he'd bury them under behavioral concerns. Some quit, others were quietly transferred. That's why no one warned me directly. Everyone was scared. But I wasn't going to be his next casualty. I spent the next 48 hours building a detailed timeline, emails, Slack messages, saved edits, even screenshots showing the exact moment he downloaded my files into his deck. Then, using the firm's internal client collaboration portal, I uploaded it all marked for review author attribution audit. The post was private at first, only visible to the internal client team. But that included their senior director, their legal liaison, and the VP of marketing. And I knew that once they saw it, questions would start. When the morning of the presentation came, Daniel strutted into that room like he'd already won. He didn't know the storm I'd set in motion. And when the client asked, mid-presentation, why my name wasn't on the deck, that's when the silence hit. But that wasn't the end, not even close. Because the next week, something surfaced in that audit, something buried deep in the company files that turned the entire situation upside down. After that meeting, the office turned cold. No one said it directly, but I could feel the shift. People suddenly looked at me differently. Whispers in the hallway, Slack messages stopping when I walked by. Even Maria kept her head down. The audit I'd triggered was spreading through both the client and our firm's management team. The client's legal department had started asking for documentation trails. HR had reopened performance reviews. Daniel wasn't as smug anymore, but he still acted like he had control. He didn't realize that I was already 10 steps ahead. That weekend, I stayed up late with my laptop, laying out everything in a single folder on a hard drive labeled insurance. I printed copies of key emails and stored them at home, just in case they tried to wipe my access. I also backed up my Slack conversations with timestamps showing Daniel's mentorship, the ones where he'd said, "Don't share anything until I review it first. I'll make sure it gets seen by leadership." Then, I made my next move. I didn't post anything publicly right away. Instead, I created a private post on our internal project forum, the one that both our firm and the client used to coordinate deliverables. I uploaded screenshots of my original drafts, voice memo transcriptions, and all the timestamps that showed Daniel's first downloads. At the end, I wrote one line. For clarity on authorship and attribution, I've attached original files showing the development timeline. That was it. No accusations, no drama, just facts. Within hours, the post started getting quiet likes and private messages from people who'd clearly known but never spoken. One of the client team members, a senior strategy director, messaged me privately. "Thank you for this. We were wondering why your name wasn't on the credits. We'll handle it." By Monday morning, Daniel's world started cracking. He called me into his office, trying to sound calm but failing. "That post," he said, forcing a smile, "looks unprofessional. You made the client uncomfortable." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Good. They should be uncomfortable." That was the first time I saw fear flicker across his face. He leaned forward, voice low and tense. "You're playing a dangerous game. I've been here for 12 years. You've been here for 4 months. HR trusts me, be careful." But I wasn't scared anymore, because I had proof, and I'd already shared copies with 2 other managers, plus my personal attorney cousin who worked in IP law. That night, I sat in my apartment and drafted an email titled Timeline of Misattribution and Managerial Misconduct. I attached the evidence and sent it to HR, the client's director, and the final dagger, the firm's executive VP. Then I waited. By Wednesday, Daniel was under administrative review. But instead of going quiet, he doubled down. I overheard him telling people that I'd fabricated my evidence, that I'd manipulated timestamps, that I was mentally unstable. Classic deflection. It almost worked too, until the client requested an independent digital audit of the presentation files. That's when the twist hit. Because during that audit, the firm discovered something Daniel never wanted anyone to see, something that made my situation look small compared to what he'd been hiding. He hadn't just stolen credit. He'd been funneling outside consultant work under client projects, getting paid twice for the same deliverables. And now, he wasn't just facing embarrassment. He was facing termination, maybe worse. But here's the best part. I didn't have to expose that myself. The system he used to bury me was about to bury him. Still, I wanted something more than watching him fall. I wanted my name back in the record, where it belonged. So I started planning the final move. The one that would make sure no one could ever erase me again. I thought I'd won. For a few days, everything tilted in my favor. HR stopped calling me in for behavioral check-ins. The client had gone radio silent with Daniel, which for him was worse than being yelled at. People started whispering that he was under investigation for misconduct. But then something happened that nearly wrecked everything. On a Thursday morning, I came into work and found my access to the company drive suspended. I couldn't open my email, shared folders, or even the internal chat system. My badge still worked, but digitally I was locked out. HR called me in 10 minutes later. They said there had been serious data integrity concerns regarding how I'd shared materials externally. Apparently, Daniel had filed a formal complaint claiming I'd breached confidentiality by posting proprietary information in a client-accessible forum. It was the perfect trap. He'd twisted the narrative, using the same evidence that proved my innocence as proof that I'd mishandled sensitive data. And HR bought it, at least long enough to suspend me while they reviewed the case. I remember sitting there, frozen, as they told me to hand over my laptop and leave for the day. My mind was spinning so fast I could barely breathe. I went home in a daze, thinking it was over, that I'd played my hand too soon, that Daniel had outsmarted me after all. But that night, Maria texted me, just 2 words. Check Slack logs. I didn't have access, but she did. She'd quietly saved copies of old threads, conversations between Daniel and Kelly discussing exactly how they'd reused my work, and worse, how they'd planned to blame me if anything went wrong. Maria sent screenshots, time-stamped, verified, undeniable. There it was in black and white. Daniel, if she makes noise, say she violated client data policy. HR will handle it. Kelly, got it. I'll make sure the files look like she uploaded the wrong version. They'd set me up from the start. Every move I made, they had planned to weaponize. That night, I barely slept. I just sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through those screenshots, my heart pounding. Every insult, every dismissal, every stolen credit, it all built to this. And then I realized something that made my blood go cold. Daniel wasn't working alone, and not just with Kelly. He had someone inside HR helping him. There were too many coincidences, too many confidential updates HR had repeated almost word for word from my private conversations with him. That's why he'd been so confident. He'd never been scared of HR because he owned part of it. So I changed tactics. Instead of trying to fight through company channels, I went straight to the client. I drafted a careful, professional message to their director. Not emotional, just factual, outlining that my account had been suspended after I provided documentation proving authorship. I attached the new evidence Maria sent, including the Slack screenshots. It took less than 24 hours for the explosion to hit. The client's legal department reached out directly to our firm's corporate counsel, citing evidence of internal fraud, data manipulation, and retaliatory misconduct. The kind of language that gets CEOs out of bed. By Monday morning, HR wasn't investigating me anymore. They were investigating themselves. Daniel stopped coming into the office. Kelly's name disappeared from the project calendar. The head of HR resigned for personal reasons. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Not yet. Because even though the truth was finally surfacing, my name was still buried in the chaos. Everyone knew Daniel was dirty, but no one was saying I was the one who took him down. So I decided my final act of revenge wouldn't be quiet. I wanted to make sure my name lived where his lies once did, in public view, undeniable and permanent. And I had the perfect way to do it. It took weeks for the full picture to come out, but when it did, it chilled me. Daniel's fraud wasn't some impulsive thing, it was a long, deliberate con. HR found a hidden pattern of deception going back 5 years, stretching across multiple clients and junior staff. It was systematic. Turns out, Daniel had been using new hires like disposable batteries, draining their ideas, their data models, their hours of unpaid overtime, and repackaging the work as his own strategic leadership. He'd built his entire reputation, and his $30,000 quarterly bonus structure on it. That's why he targeted me. I was new, ambitious, and naive enough to believe mentorship meant opportunity. To him, it meant leverage. But what made my blood run cold was what came out of the HR logs. During a deeper investigation, the compliance team uncovered private messages between Daniel and the former HR lead, the one who had left for personal reasons. The two of them had a private arrangement. He'd been paying her small amounts, hidden through consulting invoices, to flag potential threats before they escalated. Whenever a new analyst started showing too much initiative, HR would label them as overstepping. That word again. The same one he used on me. They'd quietly isolate people, limit their visibility, and then use their work without resistance. I wasn't his first target. I was just the first one who refused to disappear quietly. When I read the internal report later, I learned something that made me feel sick. There was an email thread between Daniel and Kelly from months earlier, back before I'd even started. He'd written, "We'll bring in someone fresh, young, eager, no network. Someone I can shape before Summit goes live. Make sure HR runs the cultural fit talk early." That cultural fit talk was the same warning I got my first week. Don't speak up too much, you're still new here. It hadn't been advice. It was conditioning. He'd already chosen me to be the shadow worker behind his next big win. Every mentor meeting, every fake compliment, every soft warning was part of that manipulation. I remembered one moment so clearly, one that didn't make sense until now. During my second week, I'd mentioned to Daniel that I liked doing voice memos because it helped me organize my thoughts. He'd laughed and said, "Careful, that's how people get themselves in trouble. Better to keep ideas verbal." At the time, I thought he meant it as a joke. Now I knew he meant it as a warning. He'd been making sure his victims left no proof. He'd spent years building an entire fake empire off other people's work and protecting it with layers of manipulation, fear, and backroom favors. When HR finally confronted him with the audit logs and the payments, he didn't apologize. He didn't even deny it. He just said, "You can't prove who had the original ideas." It wasn't guilt he felt, it was arrogance. He genuinely believed that ideas didn't belong to the people who made them, only to the ones who knew how to sell them. That's the kind of monster he was. Cold, calculated. He didn't steal because he needed to. He stole because it was easy, and he enjoyed watching people crumble under his control. By the time his termination letter was finalized, the damage had already spread, 2 HR managers implicated, 1 senior partner forced into early retirement, and a handful of projects now under external audit. And even then, they tried to quietly manage the scandal to keep the firm's name clean. That's when I realized if I wanted real closure, I couldn't rely on them to deliver it. I had to finish it myself. So I made a plan. A calm, deliberate, and public one. The kind of revenge that wouldn't just end his career, it would rewrite the story he stole from me. I didn't want a petty public spectacle. I wanted my work to live where it belonged, credited, archived, impossible to steal again. So I built the final act like every other pitch I'd written, methodical, boring on paper, devastating in practice. First, I answered every attack with receipts. When HR suspended me, I sat at my kitchen table and transcribed every voice memo into a clean timeline, annotating who had seen what and when. I sent that folder to the client's legal team, the firm's executive VP, again, and to a journalist I'd met months earlier at a networking event, someone who covered corporate fraud and loved a pattern. I didn't beg for a story. I offered documents. Facts are hard to ignore. Then I made the move that stopped their gaslighting forever. I asked the client for a formal authorship addendum. Not a rumor email or a quiet credit. A signed, dated statement saying which deliverables were authored by whom. I wasn't negotiating money, I was negotiating history. They agreed. The client had been burned too, and they wanted their public reputation honest. Within 2 weeks, the contract appendices listed me as the lead strategist for the Summit apparel campaign. My name, in black and white, on the client's platform, on the decks, on their site. When the firm tried to bury the fallout with internal memos and disciplinary action, the client refused to move forward without clear accountability. Their legal counsel demanded the firm annotate all project archives with proper authorship and to submit to an independent audit. The audit found the payment irregularities, the HR kickbacks, and the pattern of misattribution going back years. People who had once smoothed Daniel's path were implicated. People who had watched and stayed silent had to answer for it. Daniel got terminated the week the audit concluded. He tried to sue for defamation. The court filings were a public forensic roast. Kelly was reassigned to a non-client-facing role. The HR lead who'd accepted the hidden payments resigned and later faced a compliance investigation. The firm's executive VP, who'd ignored earlier whispers, retired quietly with a severance so small his lawyer had to call it symbolic. All of that, the dismissals, the legal paperwork, the audit reports I archived. I made sure that firm-wide and client-facing records were updated with my name on every deliverable I'd created. I asked for, and got, a formal acknowledgement from the client that credited me in the public case study they published. I didn't gloat about it in the office. I didn't need to. The internet is forever. The last piece was the sweetest. I wrote a short, brutally honest LinkedIn post laying out the timeline, linking to the client's published case study with my credit, and thanking the handful of coworkers who had supported me, Maria and the others who'd risked more than they let on. I didn't name-call. I simply posted the documents, the client's credit, and a single line. "If you make the work, keep the rights to it." That post went viral in a way I never expected. Recruitment teams from 3 companies reached out within days. The firm I'd busted. They offered me a non-client-facing, consulting severance package and an ugly NDA. I laughed, declined politely, and signed with a boutique strategy firm that valued attribution. I started the next Monday with a clean desk, a boss who introduced me by name in a meeting, and a team that actually read my notes. People asked me if I regretted making it public. I didn't. I regretted the months of being gaslit, the nights I cried over a laptop, the way colleagues pretended not to notice. But I don't regret reclaiming my work. I learned how to document, how to frame a story in facts, and finally, how to refuse being small. The last time I saw Daniel in person was at the building's security turnstile, months later. He'd been denied client access. He looked at me, and for a second I saw the old charming smile, the one that used to make people trust him. It collapsed like a bad ad. "Good luck," I said, because I didn't need to say anything sharper. He didn't answer. He didn't have a pitch left to sell. I still get chills thinking about what could have happened if I'd stayed quiet. But I didn't. I spoke up, filed the receipts, and made sure the record matched the truth. In the end, the only thing he left behind was a cautionary footnote in someone else's LinkedIn post. And yeah, I put my name on the case study like it was my brand new logo. If he wanted to be the leader, he should have done the work. If he wanted to steal it, he should have been ready for the audit. Closure feels weirdly small sometimes. But looking at my credited slides on the client's website, I felt something close to peace, and an oddly satisfying sense that I'd finally learned to bill myself for my worth. Witty kicker? Fine. Don't be the ghostwriter of someone else's career, unless you enjoy exorcisms.